All right, so slide 2 and 3, I think, is what I'm going to be talking about in this video. So last time we had talked about what the requirements were for evolution. And what we're now, when we talk about these forces, the force exerted by the environment on a population, that's what we would call natural selection. And so it's nature selecting for individuals within a population which are most fit. And so what happens is we had said, well, we had this Mark Spitz guy, and the world went from a terrestrial world to a swimming world. And all of a sudden he was like one of the, just sort of regular types. He had, they're tall, skinny guys, even in our world today, right? But as soon as you start saying, well, you have to swim to the grocery store, or whatever, it's a ridiculous example, but bear with me here. If you're going to be better, it'd take me forever to swim to the grocery store. So then in the population, you'd get more and more individuals who were like him. And so we would have this adaptation, which resulted from the forces of natural selection. And what we mean is the population would look more and more like Mark Spitz, this tall, skinny swimmer guy. And so the population changes over time. Now, to go back to Darwin's study, what he saw is he saw birds from the mainland, and then birds on this island they're really far. So if you look at the picture, it's not close at all. It's way out in the ocean. Now, I got to tell you, I've spent some time out in the ocean on board ship. And I'll never forget one of the research cruises I was on. We were out there, and there was a storm blowing from offshore. So a storm, we were in the Gulf of Mexico, and so a storm had come from the north to the south. And it had blown and so the wind was out of the north from the land, and we were down in the Gulf of Mexico. And we were 100 miles from shore, at least. And there were all these blue jays and cardinals and robins, these birds that had been blown out to sea. Of course, there weren't any islands to speak of where I was. And so what were they doing? They were landing on the boat. And on people, because they were tired. They were like, where is land? And they would find the boat, and of course, what happened to most of them? They died. But there probably were some lucky few that found an island. And if you find an island, then you're in a different world, right? Your world is not like it was over there. So think of that with the Galapagos Islands and Ecuador. And there were birds on the Galapagos Islands that had some similarity to the birds in Ecuador, which is on the mainland. And Charles Darwin was thinking about all of this stuff. He was this very cerebral kind of guy. He was thinking about all this stuff, and he said, maybe this bird right here on the island is an ancestor from those over there from Ecuador. And then he thought about this idea that, well, maybe somehow they got out here, but the world is really different. That's a tropical rainforest, and the Galapagos Islands are very dry. And so with the population, we had said there's a variety of genes within a population. So just like when you talked about myself versus Mark Spitz, my genes are in the population, his genes are in the population, but if we got transported to this other world, maybe there would be different selective pressures, different natural selection on those individuals that were blown to the island. And so So the species changed. We had said, if you find yourself in a different situation, maybe you were most fit over there, but when you got over here, you're not so much. And so what's the difference? So if you're on a desert island, the seeds have a real hard shell because otherwise they dry up, right? So if you're a bird who's used to eating seeds, finches, and that's what we're talking about, finches that lived in Ecuador, and you find yourself now out on the Galapagos Islands, some of you might have had, some of the individuals who got blown out there might have had a bigger beak. And, you know, it's like trying to open nuts without a nutcracker, you know. And so if you had a bigger beak, you're better at eating the hard seeds over there than, you know, you didn't need the big beak over in Ecuador. And so what he found is there were finches in the Galapagos who looked like the finches in Ecuador, except they had a much bigger beak. And he thought, oh, think. How is this possible? Oh, natural selection, evolution. I got it, by gosh. I got it. You know, that. So at some point, he had this epiphany, this idea that that's what's going on. And so the islands were exerting different natural selective pressures on the population that was blown out there. And so you get this change in gene frequency. Now, over there, it's tropical rainforest. Over here, it's an arid kind of an island. And so over time, these, what used to be just members of the same species, they're separated from each other over thousands of years, and then they become really different. That's speciation. That is how new species arise from evolution. And it happens. Why does it happen? It happens because of what I was talking about, but also because our world is changing. So you'll see, we're going to be talking in this course about how we are losing species. And we're losing species to extinction because of changes in our world. Well, some species, instead of going extinct, they change with the changing environment. And so this is the whole process of speciation is driven by natural selection. Okay, so where does this diversity in these genes come from? Like I said, you know, the tall, skinny swimmer guy versus the big, burly lumberjack, right? So where do these differences come from? I mean, you can think of, you know, a bodybuilder kind of person versus this skinny person, and you'd say, well, how did we get this genetic diversity? Well, I'll tell you, if you don't know, it's mutations. When we're copying genes during the course of different kinds of cell division, sometimes there's a mistake. If you ever have your ancestry analyzed, like from one of these companies where you say, oh, look, this is my ancestry. What they look for is what they call single nucleotide polymorphisms. That's just saying we have a change in the DNA in one in one base. Just a single base change in the DNA. And for ancestry type stuff, they look in the areas that aren't coding for genes. But that's called a mutation. So during the course of copying the genetic material for cell division, mistakes happen. Mistakes happen, right? And so as a result of that, you get these changes in the genes. So this would be in the important part of the DNA. And maybe it helped convert, to how maybe that's how we got those long arms that I was talking about on Mark Spitz. So you get these mutations, and maybe, if everybody had to cut down trees to survive, well, Mark Spitz wouldn't be doing so well, but he didn't die. He just was kind of one of those guys on the outskirts who wasn't very successful. And then we had the big flood, the water world, and now he's the champion, and those big old dudes can hardly move in the water. So, and that's the natural selection, right? So, mutations are the source of the genetic variability that is acted on by natural selection. And this happens over millions of years. When we talk about species, and we'll be doing a lab here pretty soon, where we're going to look at the changes over millions of years of animalcules. You don't know what an animalcule is? It's a made-up animal. But we have this little simulation of evolution that we'll be doing probably next week on Tuesday. And what you'll be seeing is how over time you get little changes, but we're talking millions of years, and then you end up with very different looking species, animalcules. So it's, and the reason we know that this is true is what? You can say it. Yeah, fossils, right? So you dig down in the ground in the right location, and you say, well, look at this fossil, and they can somehow know the age of the rock, and they say, well, look, this trilobite. When was the last time you saw a trilobite? You know what, they're kind of like a roly-poly looking thing. Or when's the last time you saw a dinosaur? If you said just yesterday a bird, you're correct. But they think that dinosaurs evolved to be what we have now, what we think of as birds. So, okay, so anyway, this is how all of this stuff works. And so I've finished basically with slide 3. Woohoo!